Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. We're going to have about an hour of warm-up and then we'll jump into the video game news. Today is Monday, February 10th. We'll scroll down the top 100 games by concurrent players in the last 24-hour period. As I warm up here, I am still thinking, as this is just an ever-evolving experience. This seems new, although who knows if they maybe just changed the name. Yeah, I'm still thinking about like doing the warm-up and going through all the games that come out on Steam first, and then having that be my warm-up section where I'm talking and then recording that. And so what would happen is I would go live after already doing at least an hour of work, talk about the news at the very front of the live stream, then play pre-recorded footage at the end, which actually happened before. So just kind of moving everything around, which is kind of funny in that that's similar to the way most of the looping YouTube shorts are done too, is that there's usually a break slightly before the end where the video actually stopped, and then the first segment it happens and transitions and gets split in half to be at the end and the beginning. So yeah, usually there's just like a moment where the person takes a breath, or there's a pause, something along that line, where that's where the actual break is. It does seem like Counter-Strike 1 is falling back down below the chart. But you still are very much in the case where, with the exception of a couple games like Bellatro, nothing new has made it into the major fandom zeitgeist, I suppose is how you describe it, in that there just are very few new games at all that have come out in the past 6 months. Plus, even of those games, very few of them demand players to constantly play them, or have such an incentive, or at least such a fandom that would install bots and run bots, which you can still pretty much assume at least Counter-Strike 2 has a massive amount of bots. At least half of its player base, I wouldn't be surprised, are bots. It speaks way worse to the health of the gaming community if in any random 24-hour period the people playing Counter-Strike 2 are double the people playing the number 2 game, which is double than the people playing the number 4 game. Whereas Marvel Rivals actually, I think, is about the reality of the situation, is that you're going to do good if you, in a 24-hour period, you get 300,000 people playing a game. Particularly, I guess it's worth mentioning, since this last 24-hour period would have been Super Bowl Sunday, and there definitely is some overlap these days as the NFL fandom has evolved, perhaps somewhat diminished in who's actually watching NFL in total, but still it has evolved into a different kind of audience. The concept of football being just white people watching black people on the field has somewhat evolved. Black people, I think, have been fans of football in smaller numbers in the past. They've just been less present, or made themselves less present, or been hidden. And you can certainly see that, I think, as a great example in the evolution of music in general, but in particular the evolution of music at the Super Bowl halftime show, where, yeah, although in fairness, it's always been fairly high in the number of rappers and black people singing and playing music in the halftime too. So, but yeah, I think we definitely are seeing more overlap today. That was a stupid side rant there that really went nowhere. I definitely think we're seeing now today more of an overlap of football fans who also play video games other than just Madden. Madden itself, particularly not that popular. So it is saying a lot, probably a bit of a damnation on the Super Bowl itself this year, that the numbers are still particularly this high. Although, it is also very possible you could be playing Marvel Rivals and have the Super Bowl in the background. It's no longer certainly the case now that most people have streaming services and aren't watching TV in the first place. It's no longer a situation where everybody stops everything and watches anything on TV, even the Super Bowl. But yeah, there's, looking at this chart, which I think I'll move away from fairly quickly, no surprise game that has popped up in the top 100. It doesn't seem like anybody was inspired to do any kind of football related Madden game. NBA 2K25 is here, basketball instead, so maybe there's some counter programming happening there. Football Manager 2025 just was canceled, so maybe that and the Super Bowl encouraged more people to play Football Manager 2024. This is a soccer game as counter programming. But yeah, you definitely aren't seeing anything new pop up that way. If anything, I imagine most people would have been playing Marvel Rivals if they were uninterested in the Super Bowl. Which personally I'm still just in the case. Let's now go through this day in history. I'm still in the case where I'm going around in circles trying to declutter and clean my house, and so that's what I've been doing, and I have no interest in watching live action football. I do believe this year may have been one of the experiments where, I don't know if it's like a Nickelodeon like channel is real-time animating the football players. I don't know if they did that specifically for the Super Bowl, but I know that in the past year they have done that, trying to get a younger audience. But yeah, I don't think you're going to get a hugely large amount of a younger audience. Inherently, there's just a decline of free time, whether that is being caused by a decline of attention span, or whether the decline of attention span is causing a decline of free time. I'm not sure if we'll ever really know, but it has just been the case for hundreds and hundreds of years that the concept of hanging out in a theater and watching all of Macbeth is not something people are really willing to do, or hanging out in a movie theater hundreds of years later and watching a 2.5 hour to 3 hour movie is not something people are willing to do. And yeah, baseball most recently has been pretty much admitted at this point by most to be way too long and way too long. Baseball in particular, going with like double headers, triple headers, just activities designed to keep the masses entertained, have particularly died out. and people are being entertained, but by more diverse things and in smaller chunks. And I think football is certainly going to run into that same issue. I think basketball is going to run into that same issue. I think as we see each of those live action sports struggle in two ways, they are going to just get shorter and shorter. They struggle to keep people's attention enough that eventually people are going to stop buying tickets to football games because people know that they're going to want to leave somewhere halfway through the second quarter of a 4-quarter game. Plenty of people, even 3 or 4 decades ago, would leave a badly played football game at halftime, but they had already gotten your money, so they really didn't care about that. But yeah, tickets haven't gotten cheaper, and people are less willing to sit around through something that they're not even really going to enjoy. Furthermore, live action sports, particularly contact sports like football, are in this dangerous middle ground where if you wanted to see a blood sport like UFC or boxing, you have to kind of commit to that, and you have to kind of know what you're doing. Plus, it's not really considered particularly family friendly. I have yet to hear anybody say I'm taking my 10-year-old to a UFC fight, even if they were big into jiu-jitsu and things like that. It's probably not the environment you would want in there, your kids in there. Whereas football is this heavily padded, heavily impacted, high impact game that they are slowly fighting against improvements in the padding and reducing the number of impacts. But yeah, if I was just a person in charge of the world, if I was king of the world, football would definitely have to be severely changed by my rulings to avoid the massive amount of injuries that happen. Not just even at the professional level where it is scaled up and even worse, but at the high school level, at the junior high level, you have kids that are pushing themselves too hard, or engaging in activities that are too dangerous, breaking arms, breaking legs. It's just not worth it when the best outcome is that a tiny fraction of high school and junior high football players maybe get a scholarship to a college where they really won't get a proper education, because then they won't actually learn and study in many cases the classes that they supposedly are taking, and then a tiny fraction of those people will, through those college levels, end up either on the college circuit, or even tinier fraction will end up in the NFL circuit. It's just not really a good system for the amount of danger and risk there. There is something to the concept of the game of football that could certainly stay around, but it just needs major rethinks and improvements. If it were a video game, it would be getting updated way more than the real world football game is. And they make little rule changes here and there, but it doesn't inherently address the level of aggression and tension that is in it. And yeah, it doesn't really address the length of it, which is the other issue, certainly. You could perhaps, if you reduce football to be half as long, so 1 quarter, halftime, second quarter, and that's it, then that might reduce the dangers by about half just because of the time on field. And also potentially could be a case where You could have double headers or triple headers of football games. But yeah, I see football in particular slowly losing favor in favor of other activities. And I'm not gonna say it's all video games, but some of it is video games too. Like, certainly 50 years ago, the idea of being a streamer and playing video games, or an esports player and playing video games, was something that didn't exist. But yeah, I think that is probably pretty much just a rant around the Super Bowl. What else have I been doing? I've been working on Google Sheets, putting in quite a bit of work and making a lot more success and having forms. As far as I'm just experimenting with making a sign-up sheet, if to make maybe like a mailing list for fans or for running a meetup of video games in particular. It's not as good as it should be as far as Google Forms. Like, as far as I can tell, there is no way to query a Google form input and say, give me all the possible outcomes of a checkbox. So you would think that that would be something you could do. So if somebody goes and changes the form, it would dynamically update all the possible options in when you're trying to collect the data. And Google Forms does a pretty terrible job about collecting and organizing the data in any way that would be useful in Google Sheets. Specifically, I'll give you an example. I've got a checkbox that says what consoles are your favorite consoles. It lists a whole bunch of first generation, second generation things, and then at the very end it's like Xbox, Switch, and PlayStation. There's no way to get that whole bunch of list and break that down into a sheet to make any kind of chart. I still feel like Google Sheets, I may very well never really understand how they want me to organize and present data. It definitely feels like I am forcing it to bend to my will more than it is teaching me to present data according to it. But in my mind, there would be an Xbox column, a PlayStation column, and a Switch column. And when you click the Xbox column would turn from a Boolean 0 to 1, a true to false. 0 to 1 just takes up less space visually. And when you check the Switch, it changes from a 0 to 1, and so on and so on. When you submit the information in the form, it doesn't do any of that. It just puts the word Xbox, comma, Switch, comma. Not even a comma at the end, which is inconsistent, so you have to actually add that too, because you're going to have to do all kinds of text searching, which Google Sheets itself is not designed to do text searching, so why is it responding and returning things as text? It would make a lot more sense if you could tell it how to return things. But yeah, the Google Forms just works in a world more of text and does nothing to convert it into numbers, which Google Sheets is going to be more around numbers. But that being said, I have managed to make quite a bit of progress there. I'm really actually surprised about that. But notably, it is also worth pointing out, as far as that being a side project that I'm doing as I'm still trying to declutter my house, which I'm going around in circles in that because it really has occurred to me more than likely I'm going to have an estate sale, and if I'm going to have an estate sale, all of the stuff that I've shoved in the garage probably needs to come back into certain rooms, and those certain rooms, which I was decorating and setting up for my own personal desires, as far as this is what I want it to look like once everything is said and done, well, I'm probably going to have to clean out all of that area and put the stuff in that area. So it really is just going in circles. slowly, yes, I am going through things and cleaning things, and I originally didn't anticipate that I'd be cleaning out my storage shed, but yeah, I might as well. It's full of a bunch of Christmas stuff I don't want, so try and have all of that. And then this is all just on the thinnest of hopes that any of this is going to be worth anything. And there's a decent chance that it's just going to be pennies on the dollars for months and months of work, which I really don't have anything else I can do at the time, but yeah, at some point here nothing may work out and everything will just fall apart. That is definitely always a possibility too. Yeah. But yeah, I did want to point out that working on the sign-up sheet has taken priority and allowed me to be very ADD and not finish the little Steam clock dock app that I was working on, trying to teach myself Godot, which that project probably replaced another project before that, and another project before that, and another project before that. I wish that there really was some magical pill for people who can't finish projects. I won't say people who are just ADHD. I've not been diagnosed with that or anything, but yeah, I don't think there really is a magical pill that does any of that. And I think it is unrealistic to say everybody who is bad at finishing projects is actually just medically diagnosable with anything. But yeah, certainly I knew at least the last project I was gonna have to get really lucky and finish it fairly quickly and get it out there in an open source fashion before I ran out of steam. And that is typically the problem with me, is I run out of steam, both physically and mentally. I definitely am not accomplishing anywhere near what would a normal person would consider an acceptable amount of activity or work. Which, yeah, even like 10 years ago, when I was much healthier and much more capable, there was definitely a chance that I would have been hired by the wrong boss, and it was said, hey, you're just not moving fast enough. I mean, not even a chance. That literally was the first job I ever had. I was fired in less than 30 minutes for not moving fast enough. That is mostly due to the fact of exploitation, I would say, than anything else. Something here has changed on my chart, and so I'm getting the scroll bars. And I thought it was because I turned this off. But when I turn it back on, I'm still getting the scroll bars too. So yeah, I would have to assume it's probably something closer to me changing the title here, and adding this title, and that being too much. So maybe I could mess with my chart here. This is the longer running 52 weeks times 3 samples of the top concurrent games, which pretty much has not changed ever since I've been running this. Banana maybe it's fallen down a point or two. Oh yeah, I suppose I also watched the first 3 episodes of Invincible. Yeah, it's fine. It definitely seems like it's becoming just old habit and old hat to release 3 episodes and then make people wait in series that don't really need it. Particularly in the case of Invincible, where every episode seems to end on a cliffhanger anyways. it does seem weird to release 3 episodes there. I think that Paradise show, which now it seems like they're taking a while to get to the 4th episode or the next episode of Paradise, 2 probably did not really need the 3 episodes to be released at the front. I mentioned before I was watching a French show called HIP, High Intellectual Potential, although actually it was in French HPI, a Hot Potential Intellectual, which HPI might be like Hercule Poirot Investigator or something like that. It might have been a reference to Poirot. I always kind of felt like it was. That show, or at least the season on the French version of it, ended, and I'd like to see more, but I think I just caught up. And then I found out ABC is redoing it as just High Potential instead of HPI. And so you have this English dub version that is literally doing the exact same cases and the exact same stories in a murder mystery show, except for it's in English. I would say there isn't too much of a difference between the English one, so as a thing, watching the English one might be easier for an English audience. You do lose a little bit of personality of the main character, whereas I think in the French one, the main character is shown to be a lot grosser, like chewing on bubble gum and sticking it to a stain on the window and to get the stain off, and then putting the bubble gum back in her mouth. But yeah, the English one, I don't think it's going to go that direction, but that's kind of it. Yeah, the French version is more comedic, and the side characters are kind of sillier stereotypes of people, Bumble and Cop type characters. Where the ABC version is a little bit cheaper, a little bit more serious. There may have been one episode that they added new, which was like the second episode of High Potential, but then the next 4 or 5 of them are the exact same episodes from the French show. And that just doesn't work to watch both. Not really, because immediately you go, oh, well, there's the person that did it. This is the exact same story, the exact same murder. Like, why am I watching this looking for tiny little differences? They made the daughter character, who isn't really a major character, older, and the cast is set in LA, so there's a lot more diversity than the people in France. Which the French version, I have to admit, there really were only a couple episodes where you saw anybody from African descent at all in the show, and they were immediately shown as gangsters and thugs. That might be very in line with the actual percentage of people of African descent in France, but it does come off to an American as a little bit racist, that as soon as somebody of dark skin shows up in the French show, they are gangsters and thugs. But yeah, you get a lot more diversity being in LA. They have to change a few words here and there explaining the whole setup, but it is literally the exact same murder cases, which is not what I would have wanted. And I have to certainly wonder how many times has ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox really done that, where they've just found a TV show that was fairly successful from abroad and then brought it over to America and just line for line redone all of the... Let's move forward here. There's a Steam Couch Co-op Fest. Yeah, have they... How many times have they just lazily decided to bring it to English? And weirdly, I imagine it's probably less than they should have done it, even if I'm gonna throw that derisively as an accusation, because there definitely have been plenty of shows from other countries that if you brought them over in a better form instead of just dubbing it, and then you might have gotten a bigger audience. We really haven't seen any of like the K-dramas come over to the West, even as kind of like, here's a replacement for a early afternoon or soap opera or something like that. When that almost certainly would have worked fairly well. But yeah, and certainly it is kind of crazy that there isn't an American Doctor Who like show of some sort. Yeah. And you could take those same stories. Well, it's kind of crazy that the Doctor Who show doesn't even just air since it's already in English. Apparently there's an audio update for this Shadows of the Templars Reforged. But yeah, here we have yet another adult game making it right to the front page. Although doing it right with a screenshot is blacked out. Weirdly, on this list of the new and trending, there's basically nothing big being mentioned. So yeah, I definitely am in the need to find some other streaming show. Watching Severance on a weekly basis, the most recent Severance episode feels very weird and definitely feels like they just needed to kill off an actor who didn't want to be in it anymore, because the timing there just feels so off that I literally thought I missed an episode, but there's just no way that happened. It may very well be a case that they are just deciding to move way too fast. But yeah, I can't help but worry that one of the problems with Severance is that it is just going to be this deep statement on one person's experience in corporate life more than it is going to be a relatable statement, and then it is going to fall into the danger of sniffing its own farts, for lack of a better, less crude phrase, as people misinterpret a deep artistic interpretation of somebody's experience in corporate world as being something deeper and more artistic than it really is. The other concern certainly is that you're just going to run into the Lost problem, which Severance very possibly might be the first Lost-like game, TV show, streaming show, to be ever made, where it just has mystery box elements that are constantly added, and the writers have no clue as to how they're actually going to wrap up the show. There's a high chance that Severance ends fairly abruptly and fairly unsatisfactory. There are some hints that the world of Severance has already been taken over by a religious-like corporatocracy, and while there might be a technical United States government, for the most part, it seems like the entirety of the world may have already been drastically different than what the real world is. So it would be fairly easy to explain away a lot of stuff as just being the way things are in that world, and then explain a lot of the other stuff as being absolute nonsense that was just created to experiment on the severed personalities. They make it very clear in the latest episode that they're lying to the severed personalities, although they'd already made it fairly clear that they were lying to the severed personalities and telling them absolute nonsense, which makes it difficult to really care about the nonsense that they're spouting and saying. Not watching anything else besides Severance. Kind of fell off of watching that British show called Drawers Off. Seems like because I stopped paying attention to it, it seems like you don't get even one like interesting tip as far as learning how to draw or paint per episode. They cycled in a whole new group of people, but they're still sticking to the idea that they're technically nude, but they're not really nude because they're all wearing sashes of clothing. And then each of the contestants that are drawing the live model are all drawing and using completely different styles, where it really just feels like there should be much more of a drawing class structure to that. And the show half makes me want to actually take a drawing class, although I don't see a real reason to. I imagine if I started to try to put pen to paper, my hand would recoil in fear, and I would really quickly prove that I just don't have any skill there, since my hands have arthritis and shake already. But yeah, as far as techniques, I just don't know if there really are that many techniques, or I don't think anybody really has written a book. Lots of people have written books, obviously, but I don't think anybody's really established a firm laws of how to draw things. And in a lot of ways, I think drawing classes are probably just for bored housewives and people like that have a lot of free time, and so it's all very much have a glass of wine, sit back, relax, do whatever you want. Art is supposed to be subjective. It's not anywhere close to what I imagine artists in the past, the apprentices of Michelangelo, would have been doing, where they would have been just drawing every single day, many times, touching up things, working, putting way more time, way more effort into it than what anybody nowadays would do. And even more modern painters and artists, I think, are usually driven by such a large obsessive personality that they are putting way more effort and time into making art than what your typical I'm taking an art class bored housewife is going to do. But yeah, for that show, there really should be more rules, as far as we're going to have at least one tip per episode, as far as here's a style, here's a trick everybody should get from that. And in fairness, even the PBS show, Bob Ross, I think is his name, yeah, he very often wasn't teaching too much there in his shows either. Like, he may be teaching a little, but he also took a lot of time to teach a little. But yeah, I would say there definitely should be at least one tip per episode. There definitely should be a style in which everybody should be struggling to reach. The fact that they're live models and that they're being held to trying to accurately represent the live model is taken extremely loosely. But yeah, so that's why I've fallen off on watching that show, which is not surprising, since me being interested in art is not, in drawing and painting, is not particularly likely to be a thing for too long. Let's look at the Steam Couch co-op sales and see what they've got, if any of this is new or not. Seems to be the case that most of these games are probably fairly old. I guess you technically could suggest a mixed game like this, mixed reviewed game here, and I guess maybe you can do Call of Duty couch co-op, but I seriously doubt you would expect it to be couch co-op. There's a big difference now between something like Chained Together, where it makes a lot of sense for two friends, or let's face it, usually it's two streamers, to be in the same room playing, and then something like Mortal Kombat, where depending on the netcode, you really don't need to be sitting next to each other. And perhaps couch co-op as a concept really should die on that mountain, because in reality there really probably shouldn't be a big difference between playing something with somebody sitting next to you on the couch and playing something where somebody is over the internet, even if there's a slight physical difference there. Of course, local multiplayer is not the same as couch co-op, so they are stretching the definition here. Local multiplayer would mean people would have to have two copies. Even if they were in a family share together, you'd need two copies of the game and two machines running them. Yeah. Jackbox Party Pack certainly tried very hard to be a fun collection of mini games, but honestly, it gets so far away from actual video games that it feels like it's just kind of a digital version of what something you could play without a computer. Plus, I think the Jackbox Party Packs came too fast and too frequently, and the quality of each release was average at best. Remote play together is going back to only needing one copy of the game, I think, but it's still not really couch co-op. Typically, if you can remote play a game with somebody, there isn't going to be a huge amount of timing mechanics to that. That being said, here you have two fighting games that seem to have remote play abilities. But yeah, they are definitely casting a very wide net here as far as calling it a couch co-op fest. Now, if they called it a co-op fest, everything here would fall into that category just fine. There still are some fairly bad situations where this one. This is the newer version of Clue and Cluedo, but may still have a ton of microtransactions. The version I played had a ton of microtransactions in it, and it's just like you would pay more to own it digitally than you would to just own the physical version of it. Yeah, I was still I'm still reeling from how disappointed I am with Tabletop Simulator. Like, I thought there was a lot more going on there from the beginning, instead of it really being a way too complicated setup with not enough tutorials. Definitely was expecting a more smooth experience when I looked at it. I feel stupid that I've often suggested just play the game with Tabletop Simulator, when in reality that's not actually practical now that I've looked at it. Seems like we've got slightly different games. I'm not sure we're going to get to this news story or not, so I'll go ahead and mention it. Not a game here being promoted. And I don't know if you really need a remote play ability for a gamepad tester, but maybe that would help in some scenarios. It seems like Steam has put out a new article just, it seems like probably reiterating, because it seems like the rule already existed, that you cannot have games on Steam that force you to watch an ad before playing the game, which noticeably that has been the case for most video games always, but it depends heavily on what you mean by ad, because almost a significant portion of games have a logo for Unity or Ubisoft or whatever at the front that pops up first and foremost, and that technically is an advertisement for a company, and so that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about something that would be probably an animated video that takes more than a few seconds to hide a loading screen, just 3 or 4 seconds. Now, that being said, I do think that there probably is a Lego game where when you first load it up, it shows you a video of an intro video. Maybe they're going to argue that that's not an ad because it's showing you an intro video of the game you already purchased. And certainly some of the Lego games have gotten ridiculous as far as the cross promotion and advertisements on their main screen. Some of the later video games got really bad about that. But yeah, I haven't seen anything as far as a mobile game even on Google Play. I haven't played a lot of them that forces you to watch an ad completely before you even get into the game. So it is a good line in the ground to draw, to say, hey, we're not going to let you run Google AdSense on a game that before anybody ever plays it. And I imagine, particularly on Steam, they're not going to let you run ads for like Google AdSense or anything like that anyways, but the sentiment is certainly there that we want you to jump into the game, particularly since it's the 2 hours no questions asked refund thing. It's unfair if they put a 10-minute ad in front of even getting into a game. It's unfair to the players by far, and it's definitely just not going to make a good experience. I can't think of a single situation where that would be acceptable, that you would have ads in the front. The closest thing I can think is that something like Memento Mori or Destiny Child, back when it existed on my phone, both of those had massive downloads, gigs and gigs, and their servers were slow because they were probably coming out of Korea to download and install all the data at the beginning of the first install, which I did several times on Destiny Child for one reason or another. So with that, there is usually a animated intro video that will play. Destiny Child actually had a little bit of a comic book that they had commissioned, and so it was going through like a little manga comic book story that they never made anything more than that first one. But yeah, that would be the closest thing to an ad I could think would be okay to play at the very beginning. But you don't even run into that problem on Steam, because Steam automatically will download and install things in the background. So you aren't running into that Android issue where an app will be put to sleep. Same is true on Apple phones and iOS. Apps will be put to sleep if they're in the background and the operating system determines that they need to be put to sleep, which would stop the download from happening. So yeah, Steam doesn't work that way, so there's really no need for a large intro video there to happen. If somebody on Steam is developing their game to work that way, they are just developing their game wrong. So yeah, it's nice to hear that Steam is reiterating that. clearly that might indicate that there's been some talk from either Microsoft or Nintendo or Sony or somebody else big to experiment in that direction. But if somebody had said that even in a financial meeting, you would have thought that there would have been more news around that. But yeah, guess we'll don't have anything else to say there. There was something else I thought of while I was talking about all that, but oh yeah. Also wanted to mention I had done that experiment in which I put a review for the Super Mario Bros. Movie after watching it, and in the course of about 5 days, let's estimate that much, I've gotten 170 views, which is way more views than I would get on anything else I put out there. I might get lucky and have 1 out of 100 at most YouTube shorts get that many views, or more likely out of 100 YouTube shorts I might get 170 views over the course of a longer period of time. And yeah, unless I have something really successful hit as far as gaming content, it just never gets that much views. And it's honestly, I need to take that back because it's not true. The ones that have really hit and got massive views on my channel have not been around video games. How to set up Hearthstone deck tracker is my most successful video still, I think, with maybe the Minecraft Wheels on the Bus little experimental video I made being the number 2 things. Those are not really video game related as far as let's plays, long plays, talking about video game news or anything like that. The algorithm, either specifically on my channel or just in general, and I would assume it's more likely in general, does not favor let's plays or video game news stuff, particularly if you don't have a face cam, particularly if you don't have thumbnails. So I definitely know I'm doing things wrong and I just don't have the skills to correct that, or desires to correct that. We don't have any more Steam Decks refurbed in stock today. Woot does have some routers on sale, but they are super cheap, like at $5 refurbished, and you can put DD-WRT on them or some other WRT on it and go with that, but I would prefer just going with Asus routers and Asus Merlin. And I definitely would think that the 7 GHz background mesh networking might be very useful and needed for a lot of people. If not, at the very least, you're looking for something that could do 6 GHz Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E type capabilities, and these routers definitely wouldn't handle that, wouldn't be able to ever handle that just because of the circuitry and chips on them. They are very old routers. Also, Unify has announced some new, probably proprietary standard that sounds a lot like LoRa long-range radio, something like that, for sensors, door sensors, water leak sensors, things like that, all that would plug and play with the Unify routers and switches and be very expensive equipment, but weirdly it might work very well for them to make their own new proprietary standard, in that they probably sell a lot of products to industry people and schools and things like that, colleges, and as such they may be the only vendor that is approved by the purchasing department to sell that kind of equipment. Whereas if you were to try and get some Matter thread device in large quantities, or get that approved by a purchasing department, that might be close to impossible, if not very difficult, and it might just not be anywhere as compatible and have that level of support that big business likes to have, likes to pay for service contracts and things like that to make sure it works. Yeah, by all logical thing, they should be working on a thread standard and integrating into Matter, but they aren't. And in a funny way, I think smart devices, even though I ended up purchasing quite a few in the past couple days, and as I'm trying to get the house settled, it's like every day there's some new purchase. It's like, are we gonna do this again? And it's like, I guess prices haven't skyrocketed quite yet, so probably is smart to get this now than wait 4 to 8 years to see what the prices are going to be. But yeah, I do suspect smart devices are going to become extremely expensive and extremely hard to get in the near future, at which point Unify might be one of your few options. Yeah, it definitely sucks though to say that to go back to the previous conversation, it sucks to see that the Mario movie review is getting so many more views. Watch time on it, perhaps not great. An hour and 22 minutes of talking, people maybe listening to 17 minutes or so of it on average. In that weird case, the fact that I just did ramble for an hour and 22 minutes, it makes it look like the entire video of the Mario movie might be there somewhere. So I'm probably getting some unfair views just to people who are not reading the titles. But I mean, that is just kind of how you clickbait and play the system in that kind of case. It sucks that it works. It sucks that this live stream right now will probably only get 15 or 16 views, where 10 times that will be seen just on that movie review. It sucks in general, and then I can't really become a movie reviewer and go in that direction. Yeah, there's probably not as much competition as there is in video games, but there's still a ton, and you have to put a lot of work into it. You'd have to watch a lot of videos and movies. It's a lot of editing and things, and it's just really not my passion. Particularly if I'm only going to review video game movies, that's going to limit me down to just 10 or 20 at most. That's something where I guess if I had bothered to sit through Secret Level, I could have probably made an episode for every single episode in Secret Level. Excuse me. Of course, I'm always bloviated in the way I talk, so just talk too long. So yeah, I never really would learn the skill to bring that down and edit it down into something shorter. And for movie reviews, for the most part, people don't care that they're longer. I still really don't know as far as my long plays, once I get back to doing that, if I ever get back to doing that, like how would I really get clips out of that? Like, really haven't seen a great example of any kind of video game content creator making clips. Like, because inherently to make a clip you have to be piffy and be able to say something in less than 3 minutes now is the limit. And yeah, usually you're just not going to consistently have something like that happen, or there's got to be something interesting happening in the game, and usually there isn't going to be too much of that. Like, I've had the ability through OBS, I think there's an ability to make clips, just hit a button and make clips for years, and there's never been a point where I've really thought, yeah, let's make a clip from that. Like, I just don't see how you do that, and it is just such a different kind of thing where where there's a danger there. You would spend a ton of time trying to make clips and put a lot of polish into it, and then it's just going to be seen by far too few of the people. And see, inherently that is why content creators hated the idea of clips. I wouldn't be surprised if TikTok itself mostly dies away and the concept of short videos like TikTok dies away with it. That there's just a slight forced generational shift and people decide to stop watching the TikTok videos, or inherently maybe there's some kind of app like TikTok that only comes out with a certain kind of content, in the same way that Twitch went from being Dave TV where you could stream anything to just being where you can stream video games for a brief time there before they really opened them up to the just chatting section in Twitch. But yeah, I could see a TikTok where it is literally just music and dances, and that's it. Like that's all they want, is just people singing and dancing, and they don't want anybody talking about anything, whether it's political or not. And I don't think TikTok ever really embraced too many other genres of entertainment. Like, I don't think there's really a lot of video game clip TikTokers that ever existed. Alright, well, it's been about an hour, so let's go through the Video Games Chronicle news sources and see what we've got. Feels like there was less news today than there has been in the past couple streams. That being said, I guess I did bury the lead here in that the PlayStation Network was down. They are investigating the outage. The update here is the PSN is back online. Once again, really long amount of downtime. It seems like PlayStation Network definitely is just reinforcing the reality of the situation, is that compared to Nintendo Online, which is much smaller, and Xbox Live, the PSN Network is just more vulnerable and less supported and less capable of coming back up. And I can't help but wonder if this isn't just perhaps cheapness on Sony's part, in that they just don't seem to have backup servers. But yeah, after that first major downtime that the PSN had around Christmas several years ago, which they've had several incidents since, they should have had a complete AB network, just like air gapped and not connected, always running, always ready to go, where if the PSN goes down for any reason on one, they would switch back to the other, and then there would probably be a case where the B network should be on a rolling release, so it is not at the exact same level as the first one. So yeah, if there was an update that came out and something went bad, you wouldn't update the B network and you just revert to the last known good configuration. Because one of these downtimes was a major hack, you kind of have to assume these are all major hacks. 2. Yeah, and overall it just doesn't matter the reasons behind it, it's just not good service. Meanwhile, when's the last time Steam was down? In any form, really? I'm not sure I've heard in 10 years of Steam being down at all. So clearly it's been done. Xbox has been down maybe a couple times for a couple hours, which is much more reasonable. And if Nintendo was down, I don't think anybody even noticed. So this definitely feels like this is an exclusive problem to the PlayStation Network, which they still want to force people playing on Steam to log into the PSN accounts for little reason at this point, to get a free few free cosmetic things. Meanwhile, if this is a hack, once again your data may have been stolen. Yeah. Inherently, if Microsoft and Sony could get along, which is to say, if a Japanese company could have the capability of listening to foreigners, and an American company could have the capability of being humble in front of a Japanese company and listen to Japanese people, then there should have long since ago been a merger of sorts. Microsoft clearly has better skills as far as running servers and such, and Microsoft, through its acquisitions more recently, has a very nice lineup that PlayStation is sorely lacking. Meanwhile, PlayStation has the fandom and does have the few exclusives that brings people to it, and in general in Japan is still going to be the number 2 console being sold, whereas the Xbox is not going to sell at all in Japan. So yeah, there definitely would be room for a merger where in Asian countries the PlayStation would be labeled as a PlayStation and would have the support of Microsoft as far as back-end infrastructure and game library, and then the PlayStation in the Western world would be probably still called the PlayStation, but it would be maybe called the Microsoft PlayStation, and there would be perhaps a little bit more control in the Western world from Microsoft's point. But I mean, it really is just 100% ego on all parts that such an obvious collaboration hasn't happened. Of course, PlayStation literally comes from an area of ego of Nintendo and Sony themselves, which is really just more evidence to stay out of it, not worry about any of that, and just play PC games where it's much more free from these walled gardens, which not much of a garden when the PlayStation Network is down. Moving on. Speaking of Sony, Sony also rejected a pitch for Resistance 4, according to the Insomniac founder. The Resistance franchise is largely dormant in 2025, with the main series of games locked to the PlayStation 3. There is probably a decent argument, though, as to why they would reject that pitch. In that, particularly in 2025, if that's when this pitch was made, that's what I would ask. Military style first person shooters are not particularly even 2022, when it was apparently pitched, military first person shooters, even with monsters, would have been on the downside. But yeah, it is certainly notable that even in 2022 Sony could have used one more game, and Resistance isn't a terrible game for them to have thought about bringing it from back. If the last one was in 2011, you really are talking like a 14-year gap. You could have done a full reboot to start off with too. But yeah, that's not really what Sony's focus has been at all. If you look at the kinds of games that they have really hung their hat on, God of War, Last of Us, Spider-Man, none of those are going particularly for military gamer bro type players. And that perhaps speaks to a mistake on Sony's part, in that they might be thematically aligning their releases too much. Whereas a developer of a game console probably would do well if you had like a military first-person shooter quadrant, and then you had Astrobot quadrant as just here's a completely different type of game for probably a completely different audience. There might be some overlap in the middle. Meanwhile, Last of Us is more of a stealth style game quadrant. Horizon Zero Dawn, a different quadrant there too. But the way they kind of have it, it feels like everything is pretty much all in one quadrant there, where there's probably a high amount of overlap of people who played Astrobot and Horizon Zero Dawn and Last of Us all in one corner, while ignoring the other corners and having no real overlap. So I mean, that's a long-winded way of saying they probably should have more of a diversified release of styles of games. Microsoft probably falling into that same mistake too, more and more. Well, you might say something like Fallout 76 and Fallout 4 are slightly different than the other games that Microsoft has published and the companies have acquired. It's not really that different. Like, definitely don't see Bellatro coming out from Microsoft. Double Fine with Psychonauts 2 might be the one exception. But even when they try something different, like that vampire game that failed recently, it doesn't sell well and it just gets canceled fairly quickly. And I imagine Microsoft is going to potentially just slide more and more in that direction, where it is just going to be Activision Blizzard games, mostly just Activision games, getting released and getting all the focus from Microsoft, moving them into another corner very far away from PlayStation. But it's going to create this just widening gap in that if you like to play both styles of games, both groups of types of games, you're going to just have to own both consoles, which is very much the case right now, or play them on PC, since most of these are on PC. I'm becoming a broken record here. Sony does apologize PS Plus with a PS Plus gift to players. 24 hours being down though is quite a lot. This was Friday and Saturday basically, so yeah, I don't think it probably had anything to do with the Super Bowl, although who knows, maybe a bunch of people were running the Super Bowl metrics through some kind of Football Manager 25. All PlayStation Plus members will automatically receive an additional 5 days of service for 24 hours being down. Okay. I can't help but wonder if maybe there's some legal coverage there that they're doing. 5 extra days of PlayStation Network service, though, doesn't really feel like it has much of a financial value to me. Of course, I would never pay for PSN in the first place, so I'm really the wrong person to ask. Let's see. The Okami director, Kamiya, says he doesn't want people playing the Wii version. Yeah. Kamiya recommends his definitive way to play the first Okami today. I would assume that this is in part because he is assuming that the next Okami or Okami-like game that he makes will not have Joy-Con Wii-like controls. Apparently it was originally for the PS2, although I definitely think that Okami with its brushstroke mechanic almost certainly would make the most sense being played on the Wii. But yeah, the PC version, I guess, is what they... what they're recommending. Always though, this is also just a Twitter from the guy, so yeah, I'm running out of steam here, and the statement itself is really just a tweet. Like, feels like there should be more meat on the bone to have an entire article just to what effectively is a response on Twitter. I guess it does speak something to Twitter still being around as a thing. Particularly Japanese people, I think, would have to be very hard-pressed to be convinced to leave Twitter. And if they were going to leave Twitter, they probably would go to Line or some other more Asian-specific communication site, not Mastodon or Blue Sky, or whatever a new platform would be. So yeah, he doesn't want you to play on the Wii version. It is a shame that we don't have any kind of Wii Joy-Cons that we can use on computers. That the gyroscope in the Steam Deck doesn't really accommodate that in any way. Gyroscopes are not being put into mouses and keyboards or anything like that. Whereas I feel like the Wiimote concept very well should have been adopted to other kinds of remote controls and computer interfaces and console interfaces, but I'm sure Nintendo just made a ton of patents and copyright laws preventing anybody from doing anything like the Wiimote other than Nintendo. Speaking of which, of copyright, the very last few copyrights that were being claimed for MP3s have finally disappeared. MP3, despite being very, very popular and really the only logical replacement for a long time to move from uncompressed waves or MP1s or MPEG files, or I think MP2s were videos, there was a ton of patents that weren't copyrights, well, I guess probably copyright only, around MP3, and a ton of licensing issues, which made it less likely that you were legally saving your files as MP3s. For the most part, people that were ripping CDs were already breaking law, so they didn't care that they were also encoding using a copyright infringing MP3 encoder either. But if you were going to do anything legal with it, it did create this barrier of entry. Eventually, you have AAC come out and be released, I think, by Apple as a license-free alternative, although it still has some copyrights on it. And then the free lossless audio codec FLAC is still out there as a competitor to those two, and still makes a decent sense to save things originally as FLACs files, just because you might get better quality overall, being a lossless audio codec, where I'm not sure that AAC is always lossless, and MP3 definitely was always lossy, that it lost actual technical data and was not exactly the same bits from a CD. But yeah, it's been decades and decades since anybody has had any problem playing an MP3, and it's been decades and decades since anybody had problem saving anything as a MP3. You still may have some apps that will choose other formats to save things as, but converting it over is super easy these days. It is also worth pointing out that MP3s originally on the hardware that would have been available when it first came out were extremely struggling to be able to be played. audio and the circuitry in CPUs and sometimes even GPUs and audio cards were nowhere as advanced as they are today. So making an MP3 and getting it to play back without stuttering with that first generation of hardware that was around when MP3s came out was actually quite a challenge to do. But eventually they just put in entire extra circuitry into CPUs and it became a snap and was just super easy to play back audio from an MP3. And we haven't had anything like that ever happen since that I know of, where if a new audio format came out tomorrow for some reason, I don't think any computer CPU would struggle to play that audio format. You wouldn't write an audio format that was so CPU demanding that it would cause that to happen. But yeah, I suppose that's not very video game related. It's not the case that there are some lost video games that illegally used MP3, and now that the copyright is gone, these lost video games can magically appear on the internet. Or it's not the case that you're developing a game and now MP3s as a concept is going to be way more prevalent. You're not going to have games all of a sudden implement MP3 players in the background, which you can already do that with the Steam overlay, and you probably can do it with other consoles too. And you're unlikely to have a lot of cases where you're going to be able to save audio you created in a video game. I could see maybe there'd be a case where something like Guitar Hero might add a feature now where you can save the playback of your actual music as an MP3. I don't know what the real value on that would be and how many people would really even care about that though. There is still a major problem as far as soundtracks just not being well highlighted and integrated into video games. Very few games these days have any kind of soundtrack selection or test screens that people can find to listen to music and sound effects from the game. They want you to experience the audio in a game while you're experiencing the game. They don't want you. They're not assuming that you would love the audio so much in the game that you would go out and listen to it outside of the game. And for the people that would do that, they just want to sell a soundtrack to you in a lot of cases. Moving on, Monster Hunter Wilds Open Beta Test 2 may get an extra day due to the PSN outage. The update here is Capcom has now confirmed next weekend's Open Beta Test 2 season will last 24 hours longer. So that is one thing that has been affected. If this is some kind of hack where somebody hates Sony PlayStation for one reason or other, I'm not sure what their reasoning would be, and that is pure speculation at this point. So it would be interesting if somebody came out and said it was them and could prove it was them that hacked PSN for some reason. I just don't know what the reason would be right now. It's not even like a recent game is out or anything. Let's see. Fortnite's upcoming Disney universe has been moved to a stable build, an insider claims. Oh yeah, they talked about this many months ago, that they were just going to heavily integrate Disney and Disney properties into the Fortnite universe. Although even at that, this was the only image they really showed, and they can see that you have like 20th Century Fox and Disney Plus being shown. Can't tell what that is. Can't tell what that statue is. ESPN, Marvel. Let's see. Lucasfilms on one island. Then you have a whole other island that Might supposed to be more of a representation of Disney World. But then you have a Stark Tower here. And Wreck-It Ralph there, so it's not like specific islands or specific areas. So I don't know, this is kind of like a Hollywood futuristic city. This is more of a traditional city. This is very fantastical palace type city. Then you have sci-fi and islands over here. Definitely feels to me like they were hyper ambitious, and this is just mostly concept art as far as what the art is going to be. This looks like Star Wars stuff over here. Yeah, Star Wars stuff. Yeah, and that's probably Marvel stuff. So yeah, there was just really this art, and it does just kind of make it feel like there's going to be one big world of several different islands with perhaps a track flying around the edges. But I don't know what they're really doing with it other than that, and I don't know if they know what they're really doing with it other than that. It seems like you still would just be running around and shooting people. And this definitely feels like an example where Disney doesn't really know what they're doing either. Because I definitely would prefer for Disney to have their own games with their own characters instead of just doing what looks like is going to be a few new land masses, and then just a lot of skins. They definitely are promoting Avatar for some reason. So yeah, I will be interested to see what the reception is there, as far as are a few Disney specific land masses and Disney skins enough to catch people's attention, or is Disney in a very different place at this point, which I think it is, in which kids these days just don't really care about Disney, even though they've acquired so many other things. Even Marvel stuff definitely feels like it's more for adults than kids these days. Meanwhile, Disney Plus, I think, has raised its prices once again. So yeah, that's may lose even more of its audience. I just generally don't think kids are into any one specific thing. Fortnite being an exception, certainly, but I think kids are way more into games than they are into any specific passive entertainment things. Little kids might be into Bluey, but then they also probably have several other things, and they'll move on to several other things. Yeah, even super fans of Minecraft may move away from Minecraft for a few years and then maybe come back to it, maybe never come back to it. But yeah, there's just so many different options. Nothing particularly big. It's going to heavily come down to whatever their friends are interested in. Moving on, Dragon Quest XII is still coming. Series creator Yuji Horii promises. I don't know why there was really a question there. A new numbered Dragon Quest game is definitely going to be made, unless Yuji Horii died himself, or one of the games just failed miserably. It'd probably have to be 2 or 3 games in the numbered series would have to fail miserably, and that's just not the case with Dragon Quest. Now, they did almost certainly, this is interesting that they're crediting the photo here, almost certainly they went into a little bit of oversaturation with the Dragon Quest series because they released a bunch of spin-off things and remakes of older Dragon Quests. But Dragon Quest is still, I think, the #1 JRPG in Japan. And until there was a long-running series of failures, that's not going to change. And by long-running series of failures, I would have to point out that it would have to be a longer-running series of failures than Final Fantasy games, of which there's a decent number of very big, very expensive to make Final Fantasy games that have been released recently that have not gained any kind of success that Square Enix wanted. But yeah, you tend not to see Japanese game series disappear or even really go into hibernation in any way. They tend to just get released no matter what. Let's see, the Diablo creator says fast leveling up in modern ARPG cheapens the entire experience. David Brevik thinks the focus on speedy progression in today's ARPGs makes a worse experience. Now, what I want to know is, first of all, is David Brevik working for Blizzard at this point? I would assume the answer is no. And then, secondly, I would tend to agree with him. But then I also have to admit that my fandom, what little there was of Diablo, was around Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 in a very different world where you didn't have online, you didn't have that much competition. But yeah, the Path of Exile style of seasonality in Diablo 4 is something that absolutely does not interest me. To have a character reset after a season and to have an experience where you're just leveling up way too fast. That being said, I think there probably is room in the middle for meeting of minds there, where Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 probably were a little too slow. You probably didn't level up as much as you should have. You probably didn't get as many skills as you should have in a faster point. There definitely were points in Diablo 1 and 2 where you're spending 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes playing, and maybe you're not getting any item drop that's of any real value. Maybe you're getting barely a small amount of gold that really you're just going to go and spend on potions. Maybe you're making it further in the storyline in the dungeons by a little bit, but progress sometimes can be fairly slow in games that are going to throw a near infinite number of enemies at you. I would say playing Torchlight 2, progress happened fairly quickly in that game, but then you ran into a problem where leveling up really was just increasing numbers and stats and not adding anything particularly new as far as an ability or the way the game played. And you'd get item drops, but none of the item drops matched the sets that you were actually looking for, so very rarely did you want to actually swap things out. Which in Torchlight 2 in particular, it felt like you should be getting gems and items of importance, unique items, almost always. So you're swapping things out and playing in the menu a lot more. I regretted almost every single time I went to a menu and leveled up in Torchlight 2 because all you're doing is clicking a plus number as far as health and attack and things like that, and adding one more skill point to a skill that you're already using. Let's see. So yeah, he criticized Diablo 3, which he didn't work on, saying that you could reach level 70 in a matter of 3 to 4 hours depending on how they play the game, which that does seem like that is way too fast. Like, I don't want to level up 1 time per hour, so I'm playing 70 hours to get to 70, but that isn't too far off from what I would want. Inherently, I think this is also ignoring, though, the problem that your player level does not travel over to different characters. So if you make one character in Diablo, at any Diablo, you're going to start at level 1 and you're going to have to start all over and play again. Whereas, personally, I would have been fine if it took me 70 hours to get to level 70, if I could at any point change my class from being like an archer to a swordsman or a wizard or something. And that's what I want to see in any Diablo-like game, is can I change classes? Can I play as a different character without having to start back at level 1? And most games are designed specifically so you couldn't do that. There is definitely probably some sour grapes here, but I also have to admit that Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 stand out as being very different games and a better game experience to me. It's kind of a shame that there isn't the easiest of ways to play Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 on Steam. Most people back in the day would agree that Diablo 2 was great on its pacing issue, and that's why so many people played it compared to the competition at the time. No note here if he actually works for Activision, but I would have to assume he does not work for Activision Blizzard anymore. So let's see if we can do a little bit of our own research here. Let's see what Wikipedia says as far as his current employment. Co-founder and president of Blizzard North, he's best known for the critically acclaimed Diablo franchise. Currently serves as a game designer and founder of his independent studio, Greybeard Games. Okay. That would explain a lot too. Let's see, what is he doing on Greybeard Games? As far as, well, it seems like this took me just to an about page. It seems like it's a single page. And we have It Lurks Below, Badlands, the Monomancer, then Diablo. And this says copyright 2018, this original Diablo pitch document. So what is this? Blogspot. So he's got like games given away. So yeah, it seems to me like there's a major fall from grace. And if anything, I think this highlights how people who are given credit for making a video game are not the whole totality of the team. Like, while this game here may play somewhat similar to Diablo 1 and 2, it clearly looks totally different. Totally different art style. Very pixely. Way less polished. In no way would you compare a game like this to Diablo, or would you even begin to think that the director of Diablo 1 and 2 was involved in this game. And that kind of fall from grace probably highlights a lack of the actual attribute that most game producers and directors claim they have, which is to coordinate people and get people to work together and with them. Because had this person left Blizzard and had those qualities, you almost certainly would have had more funding, almost certainly would have had more people working on the game, more polish on it, He didn't even self-publish the game. He had to go through another publisher. So yeah, it's possible that there's a much deeper story there, but in general, it also just seems like David Brevik can spout all the sour grapes he wants, but he really is not bringing up anything to back it as far as art styles and things like that. Inherently, had I actually been the person who made Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, had I then left the company, I would have made something way closer to Diablo 1 and Diablo 2. Probably something around Angels instead. Probably not anything like Bayonetta as far as Angels goes, but you could certainly see a top-down clicker RPG game with Angels. You could certainly also get away from Angels and Demons as a concept, and you could go in a very different direction. You could have gone, it would have been weird timing to go into like an Asian direction, but right now, if you were to make something around the Monkey King, like Wukong, that played like Diablo, you might get a very large Asian audience from that, playing that style of game. You could also certainly have done a Lord of the Rings style fantasy game, or just general animals fighting bears and wolves and things like that. Of course, it is also very common that somebody works on 2 games. It takes potentially over a decade to make those 2 games, and you just want to make something completely different. And yeah, that is the problem of calling somebody a creator or calling them a director or anything. They may very well have the tiniest bit of a few thoughts, and then there may be hundreds of other people on the team that polish those thoughts into an actual final product. And one thing I can say about the Diablo series is that they have been, at least thematically and conceptually, consistent in the story they're telling, and the gameplay is still, for the most part, the same, with the differences in leveling being a major exception. Let's see, Occult GBA RPG is the 38th soundtrack added to the Nintendo Music app, which, boy does it seem like they skipped over 37 other soundtracks. Golden Sun brings the app total runtime to more than 93 hours of Nintendo Music. Weird. The Nintendo Music app itself, just like a weird thing. We're going to let you have this music. Is it all free? Is the question. I think it is. I don't think there's ads in it, but it is very much just like a case of Nintendo just like controlling all of its potential music instead of putting it on Spotify, where they might get at least a few pennies for listening, which I guess at a certain point maybe parents are happy for that. I wouldn't be surprised if the Nintendo Music app just magically works on the Switch too, and then it starts to make a little bit more sense. But generally speaking, as a parent, I wouldn't, if I was a parent, I wouldn't want kids to listen to Nintendo Music. Like, if I'm gonna try and force their music taste in any direction, I'd force them into more classical or musical songs, something that is more relatable, something that is more valuable than video game music. I feel the same way. Every now and then you'll see an orchestra have a special night where they're playing video game music songs, and yeah, it sounds kind of interesting, but it also just seems kind of ridiculous to go through that, jump through those hoops for no real good reason. Yeah, I kind of want to see a full list now of what the other 37 soundtracks even are. because that's quite a lot. Of course, these soundtracks also are fairly worthless. Maybe the Japanese audience is way more into this, I don't know. Let's see. Relic's strategy following its Sega split includes smaller scale games and reimaginings of classic. The studio also commits to existing games and will continue to make large, complex strategy titles, which feels like they're basically saying they're going to do everything. Which, yeah, I guess that is the kind of statements that you can make right now, and then we'll just have to wait and see what actually gets delivered. Take-Two seemingly hinting at an eventual Grand Theft Auto 6 PC release. Historically, Rockstar Games have started with some platforms and then moved on to others, is a quote here. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't believe that it's coming to PC. If anything, I think there's just more of an argument to be made to be upset by it not being day one launch PC. But I think there is just a case there where that's just going to be the case. The truth of it is there won't be a day one launch for PC. The bigger question, I guess, to ask is there a major reason why you need to play GTA 6 day one on launch? Now, I would say probably not. You could probably wait years and still jump into GTA 6 and have a similar fun experience. I don't think there's going to be major spoilers on the story that anybody cares about or anything like that. I'm noticing here that this hand is weirdly animated. In that the thickness here at the wrist is not really coming inward in any way, and you can also kind of see right here kind of a sharp curvature. I can't help but wonder if there is major amounts of 3D face scanning and 3D modeling going on the head, and then this bandana covering a swap where the head is attached to a lower rendered body. Although it won't really matter in the actual game. But yeah, it is kind of a shame that we don't have that same level of detail in everything, particularly in promotional art here. But yeah, they make decisions and make priorities. Apparently, Diego Maradona is coming to EA Sports FC 25 this week. 3 years after being pulled from the series. Apparently there was some kind of legal dispute. I don't even remember this being talked about, but then again, I don't follow soccer things. Yeah. Being in the United States, I'd be very surprised if I went to a meetup or somehow met other gamers and they were super big into football as far as soccer, as it's called in the United States. Yeah, I'd be extremely surprised. Although there probably are a few that are into it. That just wouldn't be people I tend to run into, I think. Let's see. Another classic Resident Evil game has been rated for current gen consoles. Resident Evil 5 and 6 have both recently been classified by the ESRB. I can't help but wonder if this is just slight ports instead of full-on remakes, and maybe this is all Capcom really plans on doing. The rumor is that Capcom is potentially remaking Resident Evil 1 yet again, instead with the current engine. And that may very well be a way of buying themselves some time. Certainly they could also remake Resident Evil 0, just full on remake that with the current engine, and that too might buy them some time. But then they're just going to be back in the same situation where they have to think about how they're really going to deal with Resident Evil 5 and 6. I don't even think Resident Evil 5 is a bad game. It's just perhaps a game that shouldn't have ever been in the Resident Evil series. But Resident Evil 6 I definitely do think is a bad game. And then you have Resident Evil 7, which you can't really touch. You could maybe try in a few years to remaster it, but you're really not going to accomplish much remastering Resident Evil 7. They would be insane to touch any of the side games or the multiplayer games, which they just shut down the multiplayer aspect of Resident Evil Reverse. They just announced the shutdown of it. If they full on remade Resident Evil 5 and set it in Africa and only had Sheva as the playable character, that might solve some of the complaints, the kind of unfair complaints that were thrown against Resident Evil 5, but the Japanese Capcom company, I think in particular, took it to heart and were insulted / embarrassed by the fact that people were complaining. It definitely was one of those Kotaku-like articles, cancel culture type articles, where if you were playing Resident Evil 5 as Chris, which you almost certainly were, since I think he was the default single-player character, and you couldn't play as Sheva unless there was a couch co-op thing going on, you were this American white guy running around Africa shooting a bunch of zombie-fied, like, African people. And yeah, certainly that was complained about as feeling a little too racist, which, okay, I could see that criticism, but then also it's a Japanese company doing it, so they probably didn't even think of it that way. And inherently, even if you did remake the game and you're playing a Sheva, then you're just going to be an African woman running around shooting a bunch of zombified Africans, which would still be better. Do you want to really introduce Sheva as a character who has since never been used, though, when Chris Redfield was a previously existing character? And really, by the time you're getting to Resident Evil 5 and 6, they've just introduced too many characters for their own good and gotten far too far away from the characters that are in the main Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 games. And so there is perhaps an argument to bringing in the guy from Resident Evil 4 into a new game and calling it Resident Evil 5. You could definitely take elements and concepts from Resident Evil 5 and 6 and merge them together. But yeah, I would definitely take concepts from 5 and 6, merge them together, and then make 2 new games called Resident Evil 5 and 6, if you're going to go in that direction. Remember, Resident Evil 7 is called Village, Resident Evil Village, so even there they had moved away from properly having a number at the end of them. I don't know if there's really too much other to complain about Resident Evil 5, though. In particular, it's too actiony, like 4. You're definitely getting even further away from the horror aspects of the game series, and 6 is particularly way too actiony. But yeah, there's nothing really bad about it. I totally would play Resident Evil 5 right now if I had a reason to, whereas I would never go back and play Resident Evil 6 again. Let's see. The Sonic co-creator, here's another creator who perhaps is given too much credit. Yuji Naka has updated an 8-year-old mobile game. It's also worth pointing out that he's currently serving a suspended prison sentence for insider trading, which several people at Sega, I think, or several people did some kind of insider trading before a game came out and failed miserably. Pirates of Coin is a unfortunate name, I guess you would say, for a game to update, considering he is effectively a modern day pirate, convicted. Would be kind of interested in Pirates of Coin as a game, but let's see what it really looks like. It seems like it's a mobile coin pusher game that looks fine. The problem with these games is that you're going to run out of interesting things fairly quickly, and they tend to be full of ads, interesting elements. Wouldn't be surprised if it's updated just so it continues to run. It looks very rough, and this little screen at the top probably doesn't add much of anything, even though there's like a level here, so maybe there's some RPG elements to it. But yeah, for fans of idle games like me, this is going to be a game that's too interactive, and for fans of interactive games, it's going to be too idle. So you're going to have a very small audience. But yeah, the rest of the story is mostly around his insider trading aspect, which inherently, when you have one default screenshot of somebody and then you're just using it always, it often is the case that it's inappropriate to have that one screenshot used when, depending on what you're talking about. Moving on, it's still taking me about an hour just to go through the Video Games Chronicle headlines. I don't know why I've all of a sudden slowed down so much through them. Maybe it's just we're getting more news. That may be the case. Anyways, the Epic Games Store winter sales live with discounts up to 75%. I really would like to know some feedback as far as, since I'm working on this survey as an experiment, as far as how many people use a friend service on the Epic Games Store. I'm not sure that the Epic Games Store even has friends. I'm pretty sure it does, but like I'm not 100% sure it does. I'd imagine the numbers are very, very low. But then it is also worth pointing out that the friend systems, in the experience I've had with them, tend to be a case where you are literally just friending maybe 10 people at most, and these are your best friends of people you really want to play games with on any platform. It's not a YouTube or Twitter type situation where you're just constantly trying to get as many subscribers / friends as possible so you can broadcast out to them. I think inherently that's a big issue with Discord too, is why it doesn't have this adaptation, is that you can make your own Discord server, but really you're just shouting out to other people when most people aren't going to go through the effort to follow anybody else on their Discord and do a tit for tat backwards and forwards of conversations or friending, which inherently that might be a problem of just the content creator mentality that so many people have these days too, is that everybody wants to be a content creator and wants to convert everybody else to be their viewers, but nobody really has the time or desire to be a viewer of anybody else. And if that was to be translated into a real world conversation, those kinds of conversations stop happening very quickly, and you stop being friends with those types of people. Somebody who just wants to talk and talk and talk and talk non-stop and never wants to stop and listen to what the other person does. I find it very much the case that I have to remind myself and be very careful when I'm talking to people in the real world to say, hey, let's ask some questions, let's actually look like we care and engage. Even if we don't really care, let's give them time to talk and respond. And even at that, I probably am such a talker myself that I'm still heavily dominating the conversation. Plus, there are also some people that just can't catch up. I mean, they just can't match the amount of conversation that other people have, and they will sit there and say nothing, and they will think that that is perfectly acceptable, that their input is almost zero. And if it's a group of friends, maybe that's okay. If it's a one-on-one conversation, that's probably not okay. Moving on to the Gematsu articles, let's see if we can go through these quicker. Touhou Spell Carnival is coming to PC in 2025. I will once again say my macros did not want to work 100% today. I had to try several times just to get it to work. In particular, they definitely are just falling apart more and more often than even before. It is a shame, and it does seem fairly random that sometimes I just have to straight up reboot Firefox 1 or 2 times just to get it to work, when really the coding should be fairly rock solid and should be working fine. But yeah, it doesn't. Phasmophobia wrote 2025 updates roadmap, announced sales top 2 million on consoles. Phasmophobia, not to be confused with Phantasmophobia, a much older game, which is what I thought of when I first saw this. Although this might be well, this might actually be the same game being remade. Let's see, do we have a trailer or video of anything? No, I don't think this is. I don't think this is the same game. It's hard to tell. It's possible it is. It's possible that it is just such a new remake that things are just so different. Let's see, let's go to the Steam page, maybe we can see a little bit more. No, Phasmophobia is a completely different game. Yeah. It's still in early access. It's still a very different game. And name similarity doesn't create any kind of connections here as far as the More Like This tab, which they desperately really need to improve that. So since I mentioned a different game, let me just see if I can spell Phantasmophobia to Phantasmophobia. See if that works. I don't see a game called Phantasmophobia. What game am I thinking of then? It was a live action game. Still not bringing anything up other than Phantasmophobia. Action, horror, old. Yeah. Well, I don't think I'm going to be able to find it. There. I think I'd have to start to delve deep into just like the images here. And that's going to be way too many games. Yeah, and I can name a decent number of these, and I recognize a decent number of these. But yeah, you can see the list here is gonna be horrible. There's a lot of YouTube thumbnail style games too. You might make a Resident Evil 5 and 6 where you're playing as like either one or the bad guy as the main focus. Then that might explain some things better. Why is this serial experiment? These are psychological horror movies. Like Serial Experiment, Slain, Perfect Blue, Shiki. I don't think I saw that one. But yeah, we're getting into just random movie pictures. Live action. We'll check this first article. Yeah, let's see if there's any possibility. It's really funny to think of Resident Evil 1 as a horror game, though. Nah, it's Phantasmagoria. There we go. Asking multiple times. So it has Goria in the name, not Phobia in the name. So yeah, that was a lot of work, certainly. I think though that is a great example of the problem with the naming situation as far as video games go. They're just being tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of games on Steam, is that everything now just has a name that is too similar to another name. There is an argument now to have games that have similar names just be recommended to each other, although that just creates an incentive for people to use the same name or use similar names for name confusion reasons. I own this game. I haven't gotten around to covering it. I don't think I've ever played it before. But yeah, as far as the more like this, it is not going to be Phantasmagoria or Phantasmophobia as a recommendation. If anything, I can't help but wonder if some of these games that are being recommended are directly based on Google search results. Dude, because I wouldn't say more like these are 100% like this, because not a single game in that collection is a live action, as far as I know. Yeah, that's not live action. Harvester has a little bit of live action in it. It's pretty cheap at $1.50. A lot of these games I think have been streamed by the same streamers. And Medan is not live action either, so like only two of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times 4. 2 of the 32 games being recommended there are live action. As far as FMV, full motion video tags go. Yeah. So if I click full motion video, first thing we see is a Chinese romance type choose your own adventure visual novel porn replacement type game. Then we have one game that has live action puppets in it, then more Chinese and Japanese, or just Asian in general things. Interesting. A full motion video horror game. The truth of it is that full motion video games, while they were quite a fad and intriguing, they also really failed to ever succeed. They just weren't really the direction that things were going to go. It's too expensive. The animation is not easily controllable. But yeah, it is weird that the Chinese romance dating games that are topping the charts there. It is also worth pointing out, though, that things like Command and Conquer may have full motion video at the beginning of their intros between each level, but they're not really games that I would say are FMV games as much as they are actually just strategy games. I wouldn't be surprised if there is, that looks interesting, even perhaps a emphasis in China to make more of these full motion video type of dating games, just to get away from the anime style, just to encourage Asians in general to be interested in 3D instead of 2D girls, which is a real thing. A lot of Asian people and people in general say is that they're only interested in 2D, they're only interested in 3D. One of the big, most recent games like this Contradiction is got a lot of coverage from Giant Bomb and still really wasn't ever going to be a major success. And Phantasmagoria, going back in circles, is tagged as being full motion video. Not to be confused with Phantasmophobia, which is what the news story was about. So yeah, we've gone in circles here. It's important to remember that part of the reason why full motion video could even succeed and have that gimmick to capture people's attention is because of CD-ROMs and because of making CD-ROMs be a thing that you would have in your PC. Because full motion video really wasn't going to fit on the size of cartridges for any console game, and it wasn't going to fit on floppy disks, or I don't think very many games were ever distributed on zip disks. I'm not sure any ever actually were originally distributed on zip disks, so it really was a jump from maybe 2 megabytes on a floppy disk to 650 megabytes on a CD-ROM, with hard drives maybe being 500 megabytes around that time. So, but there really weren't any modems that could install or download anything that way. But yeah, once we got to the point where it was just easier to do 3D graphics, full motion video died in a small way because it never really succeeded that much. Mist basically created the bubble, and then it basically ended after Mist ended being relevant. Particularly once you get to, I guess, Mist 5 and Ubisoft making that game, where it's not even full motion video for the characters. That was a great signpost that FMV was dead. Which is funny because, like, nowadays you could make an FMV video pretty easily. You can have a whole bunch of people with Apple phones recording at a fairly high quality, and it would just be a matter of scripting and programming the scripting of the scenes. We did see a small bump of interest in it around things like Her Story, but those all really just became exceptions to a rule that says most people are not interested in FMV. This one does catch my interest a little bit. Of course, things being Q1, this one, though, even though it was in the FMV category, does not have a single bit of FMV video that I can see. And in fact, if anything, it looks like a very applaudable 2D animation style that it would make very little sense for you to want to put any FMV in that. So I definitely think that that is just an example of somewhere down here they have flagged something as FMV as far as one of the tags that it's just not correct. And perhaps that is a misinterpretation, perhaps an intentional misinterpretation of what FMV is supposed to stand for as far as full motion video goes. Because yes, I guess you can animate things and say those things are animated in full motion versus things being animated as a single stationary character. But yeah, I wouldn't call live 2D animations full motion video. Those are 2D images that bounce back and forth and look like they have some motion to them. I definitely wouldn't call a full cartoon being full motion video. But I guess FMV as a label is probably the wrong words to use, when reality is what we are talking about here would be in-camera video is what we're really interested in. And that still excludes the thought that somebody would take a camera and take pictures of hand-drawn animation, but yeah. Real-world video might make more sense. The realistic tag is probably overused on Steam too. But yeah. In camera, in reality, video, non-animated. Maybe you do just call it non-animated video, because animation is the thing that's really lacking there. It's kind of a backwards way of thinking of things, but yeah. This came out in 2000. Interesting. You can see Markiplier. I don't know if Markiplier is still particularly popular or not, or what's he doing these days, or if he's been canceled or what. These other names I don't even recognize, but clearly this is one of those streamer bait style games. But it is interesting how they've managed to have a 3D character overlay into a real world video of a character overlay into a 3D world. Yeah, that probably takes a little bit more work than you would think. And I'm not sure if that really changes much on the experience. Although these are the kinds of games I'm not really that experienced, not that interested in the first place. Notice the Steam Deck version is now available from this game, so it has been updated at least relatively recently. Anyways, moving on through the Gematsu news. I'm already starting late in these streams because I'm just sleeping in. Last thing I need to do is drag this out on side quests. Bubble Ghost Remake launches March 27th. I don't recognize a Bubble Ghost 1 at all, so yeah. Looks like a fine game. Of course, I really need my macros to open up these tabs if I'm going to go through all these. A Kintum demo is now available for PC. Yeah, at a certain level, if I could guarantee it was the right move, I would just close the Gematsu articles and look specifically at the games that came out on Steam. Bleach Rebirth of Souls has yet another character. While I think I may have seen this character, I couldn't literally tell you anything about him. I don't think it was around that long, maybe an episode or two at most. Let's see, Relic Entertainment announces its future plans, updates, DLC, small and large scale titles, and reimaginings, which is to kind of say everything, like I said before. Let's see, Koei Tecmo Holdings has appointed Hisashi Koinuma as president and CEO. Looks like a fairly young guy, if this is a recent photo. Yoichi Iwakawa is going to become a representative director and chairman. I wonder if this guy is older and sick for some reason. Okay. We'll have to see if that changes anything, particularly considering how when a new person is in charge of a Japanese company, they tend to just want to honor previous person's decisions and path of taking the company. So you tend not to see major changes happen, and if they do happen, they tend to happen over a longer period of time. Koei Tecmo in particular is more into releasing the anime style games, so yeah, I'd have to look here just to see what kind of games that might affect. I said anime style games. Fate Samurai Remnant is one, Dragon Quest, but these are kind of a limited subset. See if the game's published category changes it too much. Ninja Gaiden Black 2 was published by them. There's a lot of Winning Post games. So I can't help but feel like this isn't more of a case where they're more of a publisher, or they just haven't been doing as much lately. You've got like Blue Reflection and Monster Rancher Atelier Games, Nobunaga's Ambition, Winning Post, Fate Samurai Remnant seems to be the only Fate game. Ninja Gaiden Black. So new leadership might take this in a different direction in that they start to make more games. Does feel like a lot of these that they have on this list, as far as what they've actually developed, are also falling into the category of smartphone games. Yeah. This is Koei Tecmo Games. It is very possible that Koei Tecmo proper, Koei Tecmo Holdings here, might be a parent company of Koei Tecmo Games, and they may do more in other fields. It's very common for Asian companies to be in many different kinds of industries, so there may be just like a ton of anime shows that get made by Koei Tecmo, or who knows, they could be selling insurance or washing machines or things like that too. Samsung basically does that as an example in Korea, which I guess the whole crazy Korean president thing is just either not getting reported on or is taking forever to be dealt with overall. Yeah. Last I had heard, they arrested the Korean president, and now I think they're waiting for either Parliament or a Supreme Court like organization to make some decisions there as far as who's in charge and what's going on. Which is certainly not what you want to have in any country, is to have a question of leadership. Let's see. This week's Japanese game releases: Urban Myth Dissolution Center, which I assume is this one, and Sid Meier's Civ 7, which is obviously this one, and more. Afterlove EP, and let's see, that game. I'm not even going to try and read that. I question if a list of what new games came out in Japan is particularly that helpful, but I imagine it's probably a little bit helpful. Just to, in general, get an idea of just how many digital games versus physical and digital games are being released in Japan. This is probably a trend that will happen around the world, as we see just fewer and fewer physical releases and more digital releases. And if we see overall very few games being released in all 1 week, then we know it's probably been a slow week. Civ 7 VR has been announced for the Quest 3. Tribe 9 launches February 20th. I would have expected more advertisement around it, but doesn't really seem like that's the case. Typically I would expect just more promotion. That being said, it is seemingly like it might be a mobile game first, and it seems like it jumps into several different kinds of gameplay styles, but I wouldn't be surprised if you spent a large part playing gameplay styles that are low demand, low polygon count things, and that these sections are small boss fight sections at most. This is, I believe, from the creators of Danganronpa, or at least one of the creators of Danganronpa. Just from the visual style, I would kind of think that's the case. So it might be very weird too as a game. My main concern though is that it might just be super grindy as a mobile game too. I'll leave it at that. Distant Bloom is coming to the PS4 and 5 and Switch. It's a cozy management and exploration game currently available on PC. Let's see. This is another one that either was on my fall list and I took it off, or never put it on the fall list. Still not really doing any fall list cleanup either, though. The Commandos Origins launches April 9th for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Later in 2025 for the PS4 and Xbox One. There definitely is a thought that's occurring in my head right now while I'm doing this, which I should be focused on just doing what I'm doing, in that I've always had this problem of being inconsistent, and if I was just to pre-record all of this footage and premiere it, it probably would be better to be scheduled that way. But unfortunately, if you don't click that live button, you just don't get the same level of promotion on YouTube. If I was in charge of YouTube, I would definitely rein back the algorithm and rein back the features. And I'd get rid of several features, or I would make it abundantly clear that we have made changes to the algorithm and we really know how the algorithm works, and we're not going to promote things just because you're live. We're not going to promote things just because it's a short. We're not going to promote things just because it's premiered, which is kind of an impossible goal to have. The best you could possibly do is tell everybody to do the same thing and make it more of a positive. Everybody should do this. This is the recommended way. This is the default way to do things. But the concept of premiering a video and then chatting in the chat with people at the same time is totally a dead concept that went nowhere. The concept of going live only works for a small percentage, or at least some fraction of content creators, and doesn't work for most others. You don't see big red letter media or anything going live at all. You don't see PewDiePie going live and dealing with the chat at all. The concept of shorts only works for a fraction of content creators, most of which do not make any of the other kind of content on YouTube that YouTube likes. Anyways, I need to get back on track. Neon Inferno launches Q3 for all consoles and PC. I would assume that this is a side-scrolling game. Yeah, again, need to get the macros working, and need to get the macros actually opening up these tabs again. This looks interesting. There is something about the zoom in on some of these, and that this might be a little bit too tight as far as a camera angle, and that dodging bullets on a side-scrolling experience may be a little bit too much. But you do, by zooming in, get a better detailed image of the actual characters. There just ends up having to be fewer of them. Game called Hordes of Hunger launches March 6th. It's a roguelike arena slasher. Apparently I'd already seen that one. It's an interesting concept. Certainly is something like a survivor's game, but in 3D as an arena slasher. Slice of life visual novel Please Be Happy is coming to the PS4 and 5, the Xbox One and Series, and Switch on February 21st. It's currently available on PC. Also, I have to say, now that I think about it, it has been a while. Yeah, it's been quite a while since any big name bothered to put out a press release visual novel has come to console or has just come out at all. Like we are halfway, 10 days into February of 2025. Certainly that scares me. They're getting closer to tax season. Dude, that's just going to be a whole nother issue. But yeah, there's no real reason not to put that on the wish list. 99% positive. Although I still don't know if I'd ever really cover a visual novel. Yeah, we've seen kind of a slowdown on visual novels bothering to advertise themselves, bothering to come out in January. Maybe this is part of the Lunar New Year reason. Maybe it's a case where fewer and fewer are getting approved on Steam, and or fewer and fewer are just getting funded to be made, if you actually even need any funding to make a visual novel. Seems like you could do a lot of that work on your own funding pretty cheaply. A otherworldly summoning dungeon RPG called Monochrome Echoes White launches in early access for PC in late February. I think we may have already Seeing this one, but it's not on the follow list. Interesting. Although honestly not particularly super interesting. And doesn't support English. Visuals seem fairly lackluster. And if anything, it feels like they're selling their game as being in monochrome as just an excuse to point out that they didn't bother to color in any of the images. Maybe there's something more in this gameplay trailer that would catch my attention. If anything, this just screams like a throwback to very old multi-user dungeon style server games, or very old RPG games on PC, where it's just a tiny little screen that shows the actual animation and everything else is just fluff and text and descriptions. And yeah, this looks absolutely awful. So there should be at least some background art if you're going to go in that direction. Yeah, I really question whether anybody is really that big of a fan of these kinds of games that they'd want to go back and play these styles of games, because it's almost been a 100% positive improvement to take dungeon crawlers and move them into the 3D realm. And certainly there are gameplay mechanics here, like you're running low on food with every step. You lose one food. That it's just not something that I think most people care about. If you're going to play this on a mobile phone, this would be a nightmare interface. If you're going to play this on a Steam Deck, maybe that would make sense, but you could play a lot better games on a Steam Deck. I just do not see any appeal for this game at all, unfortunately. Let's see. Wu Chang Fallen Feathers lore trailer and developer diary are available on Komatsu if you want to see that. Progress Orders second trailer is available. It's a guild management fantasy RPG of some sort. And then Wuthering Waves 2.1 update Wave Sing and the Cerulean Bird Calls launches February 13th. Cerulean being blue color, shade of blue. So I understand it at least. Leave it at that. And that's going to bring us to Gaming on Linux articles. There's a new demo and trailer for Riff Raff, a fast and strategically light tower defense game, if you're interested in that. The Steam Deck verified highlights for February are here. Like a Dragon listed, Lucky Tower Ultimate, UFO 50, Fighting Fantasy Classics. It's a text-based roleplay adventure game being remastered. I don't know if any of these are based on classic text-based games, though. I don't know how many fans of text-based role-playing games really want to play a digital version of that or even exist in the first place. School Hero Beat 'em Up game, it looks like. Card game. What was it called? Takara Cards. The Capcom Fighting Collection 2. That's one that, particularly on the Steam Deck, would be well received. Rift of the Necrodancer might work on a Steam Deck particularly well. Hello Kitty, certainly a welcome inclusion to any platform. But yeah, even looking at this list, it doesn't feel like there's a ton of new games that came out in the past few weeks, particularly for the Steam Deck. The popular game launcher Play Night will get Linux support, but it's going to be a while away. It's apparently a popular free and open source video game library manager, which I imagine is going to be functionality and polish-wise below what Steam itself is, but might be very popular in the fact that it might integrate Steam and Epic and EA and all of these other games into one launcher, which is definitely what you would want if you're willing to put up with installing another launcher, is to have one ring to rule them all. As far as this is the place I know I go to see what games I have, this is the place where I know I'm not buying the games multiple times or getting the games for free multiple times, as is the case with Epic Game Store in a lot of cases. That being said, I think the vast majority of people still would only really buy games from Steam and then begrudgingly go through some of these other launchers if it's mandatory through Steam, and maybe go to Epic for free games every now and then. Epic Game Store still has really failed to do anything to actually convince an audience to move over to that, other than maybe Fortnite fans, exclusive Fortnite fans. Blender Studios announced Project Dog Walk, a micro game made with Godot. Interesting, because Blender Studio, as far as I know, has not done anything with the Godot engine before, and if you're making 3D models in Blender, you can put it into the Godot engine, export it, and import it, but I don't think there's any bigger integration. So maybe there is some future open source collaboration that might happen here, where people in Blender Studio all of a sudden will have more encouragement to go to Godot, and people in Godot will have more encouragement to go to Blender Studio. This does highlight an issue that I think most aspiring game makers don't realize, though, is that if you're making 3D models, you're going to have to use a software like Blender to make those 3D models. That's just not something you're realistically going to do inside of Godot engine. It's not a program that solves all your problems. If you're making 2D arts, you're going to need something like Photoshop, maybe GIMP, to make 2D arts and tile sets, and then import those into the Godot engine. And if you don't have 3D models or 2D art to make a game, you're pretty much not going to be able to make a game in the Godot engine. So you're going to need somebody who is capable of using the Godot engine to program a game and make it function, and you're going to need somebody who's capable of making artistic assets, music too, on top of visual assets. And the chance that that's all going to be the same person is more than likely going to be pretty low. You're just not going to have right brain, left brain people that can do everything. Yeah. And I was not expecting a live action. I guess live action is the tag, really, to use for full motion video. Yeah, I wasn't really expecting them to have 3D models and then show me a live action video of them making 3D models based on clay statues. Clearly, though, Blender is not trying to do anything amazing here. This is almost certainly a side project of theirs, just to learn and dog food the process of how easy is it really to make something in Blender and then put it into a game engine like Godot, or specifically the game engine of Godot. And so you very much can tell from this video that it's a bunch of artists who probably are very familiar with Blender. See, that there didn't even look like the Godot engine, that looked like Unity. Yeah, and a lot of what you're seeing here is not something that looks like it is Blender stuff, as much as it is Blender stuff that's being added to Unity, with effects and elements being changed in either Unity or Godot engine, whatever they're actually using. This might be an interesting video if you wanted to be a 3D animator to sit through all the way, but it is definitely a fairly boring video if you just wanted a little teaser trailer on it. So I'll leave it at that. The Campsite is a short, sweet, modern point-and-click adventure worth your time. Let's see what that looks like on Steam. It's already on my follow list. Looks like an old school point-and-click adventure. Let's see, Commando's Origins is getting an April release date. Okay, I guess I don't have anything to say there. The paranormal point-and-click adventure Slender Threads is out now. Seems like there is a tendency from gaming on Linux being run by one person to highlight point-and-click adventure games, which is perfectly fine by me personally, as I am a huge fan of point-and-click adventures. Unfortunately, it is also the case that while there have been decent numbers of point-and-clicks that have been released every year in the previous 10 years or so, almost none of them are living up to the level and the nostalgia of point-and-clicks from 20-30 years ago. These days, I still would point people to playing something like Full Throttle or Broken Sword or Indiana Jones' Fate of Atlantis far before I'd say, once you've played all these classic games, now play lesser versions of these games that happen to be newer. Kathy Rain is an example of one that I think had pretty good sales. Came out a few years ago, got some pretty good promotion, but there really just isn't that big of an audience of point and clicks to bring it back as a genre, other than a small niche genre for fans by fans, basically. There is, I don't think, any driving force that would convince people to convert adventure games into point-and-click adventure games, or any other kind of game into point-and-click adventure games, to simplify development or to just have that feel. If anything, Telltale Games were pushing point-and-click adventures into a very different style of game, and that worked for a small amount of time and then failed miserably just because of poor development, high development costs, poor development improvements, leaving really only the Walking Dead Telltale games worth playing. But yeah, people generally just want more action and less thought. It is interesting that mobile games have not been flooded with point and clicks where it would make more sense, but even at that, the screen size on a cell phone is probably too small for a point and click. Let's see, moving on, the classic Diablo game engine Devolution X improves its gamepad support and gets lots of bug fixes, which I guess this lets you play the classic Diablo game on Steam Deck and macOS and Windows, which I guess it's the case that you couldn't just install the original Diablo games and make it run. Let's see, apparently you can play it on Android too, so there might be a nostalgia play there to play on your phone Diablo 1. But they have at least announced the remasters of Diablo. So using a different game engine to play the game files of Diablo 1 is definitely going to be a choice, particularly for a content creator, compared to just playing the remasters, which is way easier to recommend and way easier to install. But it is probably a good thing that there's some level of competition pushing Microsoft, now owning Activision and Blizzard, to do something with their old games. But undoubtedly, you could also make the argument that Diablo 1 is abandonware because they just have not been doing something with the Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 games for a long time now. it's a hard argument to make considering they kept making sequels, but yeah. It is kind of crazy that the events and the level designs of Diablo 1 weren't pushed forward into a Diablo 3 or 4, where there would just be a campaign or scenario where you went through the events of Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 with all the new game engines and character selections and skills. And then you could experience the world in a very different way than just replaying it. Apparently early access wasn't enough for Ulterium Shift, so now it's on Kickstarter. I guess the question here in particular is going to be, are we going to see a lot more Kickstarter type projects as finances get tighter and tighter? If we do, I would question whether any of these Kickstarters are going to be funded. The vast majority, I think, of Kickstarters don't get funded, particularly as far as video games go. I imagine people are just going to have less and less money. I worry that people are going to have so little money that it's just going to become a nightmare scenario. Although, frankly, an impoverished populace is a nightmare scenario that can go on for centuries. Really, you look at like Brazil and such, and it just becomes the new norm. As long as people aren't literally starving to death, it stops being as big of a deal. But yeah, that really has nothing to do with this game. But yeah, I could see, certainly we see a pushback to Kickstarter for a while until people realize it doesn't really make any money. I don't know what funding you really would go through if you were going to make a game right now. Ideally, you'd want to have your own money or an angel investor where you're only accountable to one or two people. Even bank loans, if banks would give game developers loans, which I imagine in many cases they won't. Then Patreon might make a little bit more sense. Keep people engaged, keep people donating smaller amounts over a longer period of time, versus Kickstarter, where Kickstarter itself still has that all or nothing thing, and seems like you're asking for a decent amount of money. They're hoping to raise $50,000, which really isn't that much money to make a game, but it's still a ton of money to any individual person who might donate it. I would certainly take $50,000 any day of the week, and that would potentially lower my house payment by quite a bit at the very least, if not get it dangerously close to being paid off. Anyways, moving on. Let's see, the Decky loader for Steam Deck gets a store update to show currently installed plugins clearly. I did see that there were some updates happening with the Decky loader. It is, though, very much a case where if you're not really playing with your Steam Deck, which is the case for me right now, it's not really worth turning on the Steam Deck, plugging it in, charging up the battery, and updating things to then just immediately turn it off again. And I would also say the Decky loader has several plugins, but I'm not sure how many of them you really want or need. It is very much little tweaks, things that work with like ProtonDB, so Steam would never do it. Things that Steam should do, like changing the animations as far as the boot and all that, which they overly complicated that process, so it integrated with their store shop for no good reason. But yeah, there really is at most 3 or 4 Decky plugins you might want to really install, and that's it. And some of the plugins themselves need improvement. Let's see. Here's that story. So it did show show up. Valve bans advertise-based business models on Steam. No first avatar adverts like in mobile games. That's a different way to phrase it than what I had seen. So to me, that seems like you cannot do any kind of advertising in the game at any point, where I had heard it as you can't force somebody to watch an ad at the very beginning of the game. Now, arguably, if you can't do any advertising anywhere, there's at least a couple of Microsoft games where they tried some of that, like ads on billboards in racing games. And if you're advertising sequels to your own game, that exists in many Steam games. So I would have to assume that they really mean third-party advertisers, not second-party advertisers or first-party advertisers. Although maybe even second-party advertisers in this case might be banned. But I'd imagine it still makes sense that you could, when you load up a game, see an ad for the sequel to their game. I think even some of the Valve games might be that way. Anyways, the update here is it was actually already a rule Valve had. It was listed on a pricing page, but the change has made it a lot more visible with its own dedicated section. So in a lot of ways, it's just them reiterating and writing it. So this is very much no news situation where Valve is getting a cheap pop of positivity for really just having some intern rewrite something, which literally that may be what this is that some employee, whether intern or not, was assigned to rewrite something to prove that they actually were doing any work, and so they just rewrote the description. It could be also a lawyer thing. Totally believable there. But yeah. Requiring players to watch or otherwise engage with advertising in order to play, or getting gameplay behind advertising. If a gameplay's business model relies on advertising on other platforms, you need to remove those elements before shipping them on Steam. That alone may eliminate, or at least limit, the number of mobile games that all of a sudden start showing up on Steam too. Some options you could consider include switching to a single purchase paid app, or making your game free to play with optional upgrades via microtransactions or DLC. So still happy for microtransactions and DLC that exist, where they can make the real money. Valve has no way to make money off the advertisement. Should not use advertising in a way to provide value to players, such as giving players a reward for watching or engaging in advertising in games. So no extra reduction in a wait timer because you watched an ad, or double the amount of currency you gain in an hour because you watched an ad. Should not charge other developers for access to Steam features. These include sales pages, bundles, store pages, and franchise pages, which that in itself, it says developers, but I wonder if that should also include publishers. But yeah, this definitely seems like a different issue, where people apparently were charging access to sales pages or bundles, or being listed on store pages as advertisement to a different game, which they definitely have been cracking down on that. I wonder if some of this might be also around like an RPG Maker like game, where you make a game via RPG Maker and then they were selling access to an RPG Maker sales page to promote the games that other people were making. And they're also mentioning that they previously banned blockchains and NFTs. So yeah, as far as updates and announcements from Valve, although we don't get a lot of them and none of them are particularly big, they've for the most part all been very positive. It is just the deafening silence as far as the slow production of SteamOS on other handhelds, and the slow evolution of SteamOS to the point where you might actually install it on a OEM PC or a pre-built PC. And even when that comes out, that'll just be one conversation one small group of Steam fans are having, where the vast majority of Steam gamers are still just going to be playing games. And then the incredibly slow progress as far as Valve making new games is the big silence that irritates people. But it is better for them to say nothing than promise a Half-Life 3 and never deliver on it. Which there definitely were still more rumors that Half-Life 3 was coming out this year, and I'll believe it when I see it. Moving on, GE Proton 9-24 was released with a new save game detection feature. Now GE Proton 9-25 too. So there was a quick hot fix. Proton continuing to evolve, GE Proton being the fan fork of Proton, where Proton itself is Valve exclusively working on it, or at least it seems like Valve is exclusively working on it and controlling Proton. Wine 10.1 is out now with fixes for Battle.net and more Bluetooth driver work. You'd be surprised how many softwares have to bend over backwards to get Bluetooth to work. Bluetooth is a terrible, terrible designed by committee protocol, and it's a shame that it even works a little bit because people still work with it and still use it, when it would make a lot more sense if there was a new standard built directly into, just like Wi-Fi, or I don't know, if you really want to put it in any of the other wireless standards like Thread or Zigbee or Z-Wave, that really wouldn't make a lot of sense to do it. But also, if you change the standard in any way, Bluetooth devices in cars would stop working, so it has this built-in audience. But yeah, maybe the newest version of Bluetooth, which I think is 5, maybe 6, would improve some things, but it's been slow going and slow progress to get Bluetooth to a spot where it works particularly good. Mostly still, Bluetooth is really only used for audio, and none of the other possible connections you could do with Bluetooth tended to really be embraced. Let's see. Everwarder is a fresh tower defense roguelike hybrid game, if you're interested in looking at that from Gaming on Linux. Please don't distract me, I'm trying to dig a big hole over here. It is another game, which, I don't know if that really would be something people would want to play. At some level, it's kind of just like Minecraft with a different art style, where you're digging a giant hole in your background. Yeah. They're calling it a minimalist game, which probably means there's just nothing really to do. You're just going to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And there very possibly isn't even an end game, so you might just play it forever. That being said, I can't help but point out that it is very well received, so there might be a coziness to this concept that I'm not getting. And then our last Gaming on Linux article is Cast and Chill is a gorgeous looking pixel art idle fishing game coming soon. Which I kind of do like that pixel art. Let's check it out on Steam. There's something to that. I can't help but wonder if we are approaching a point where there's significantly fewer fishers in the world than once there was. If it was 30 or 40 years ago, you would more than likely have grandparents or great-grandparents still alive that were big into fishing, but nowadays it's just less common and less of a thing people really want to engage with. This looks like this might have been a great game for those generations. That being said, I don't think that generation is alive much more. Moving on to GameDeveloper.com articles. I kind of feel like this is more editorial than anything. WB Games is beginning a recovery process post-exec departure. Suicide Squad and Multiversus shutdowns. So they're talking about a lot of different things in one article here. Developers allegedly felt stuck in limbo due to the trend chasing and uncertain leadership during the most recent WB Games regime. Which, okay, I'm willing to believe that. I'm not willing to read any more of this article. I would say they are very much at the beginning of a recovery process, and it could be years, if ever, if they actually do recover. And I'm not 100% sure that I believe Multiversus should have been shut down. And I think for Multiversus, this would be the second time that it was shut down. But yeah, I think they should have probably kept it going and just every now and then put an update, leave it in early access for several years. Suicide Squad being shut down is fine by me, but I think the concept of a Smash Brothers game not run by Nintendo that runs on PC still has enough of an audience to make sense to do. Apparently Roblox is suing rule-breaking third-party marketplace called Player Auctions. Real money trading goes against Roblox's role, and the company wants to prevent Player Auctions from selling more in-game items to its unaware player base. So interesting how you've never really seen Steam do this as far as key trading or skin trading and selling on their marketplace, but then also Steam has managed to stay out of the SEC's eye, whereas Roblox is very much under pressure and needs to take action to look like they're trying to clean up their player base. I would hope that kids these days are not super big into Roblox. I would suspect that kids still probably are, but I'd hope it's not growing as an issue and a problem. Company of Heroes developer Relic is going to build for the future with smaller titles and classic revivals. We've talked about that already. Here we have the SEC confirming Roblox as part of an active and ongoing investigation, which is probably the case for many companies, video game companies or otherwise. Of course, it is also questionable how long the SEC will have funding and will have talent, as the United States presidential administration is slashing its budget and slashing the organizations into being much smaller. I would not make an argument streamlined. Inherently, when you send out emails just inviting anyone to retire who wants to retire or quit, you are going to get a lot of older people who are close to retirement willing to consider it and take them up on that offer. And those older people who've been working there longer tend to have more institutional knowledge. Whether it's good knowledge or not is going to come down to people's opinions almost, because a lot of older people might also be the ones establishing rules and maintaining rules, and so you're not going to have fast change. Now, arguably, most government organizations shouldn't drastically change and change your rules and implementations. But yeah, it is very believable that the SEC would get slashed, shut down completely, underfunded. All those are possible. I believe the Consumer Protection Agency, maybe that's not the actual name of it, in the United States has already had an executive order to shut it down. Inherently, most of the organizations that have made up the United States have been established by either congressional or presidential orders and were not established as laws passed by Congress or laws by amendments to the Constitution. So yeah, it is weird that so much of the government can be so drastically changed, but inherently it's Congress's fault for not passing laws establishing these organizations permanently. Depending on the organization, there's definitely arguments to not take an axe to them, but take a scalpel to them and rethink how effective is this organization. I think most people would argue that the TSA needs a restructuring. I think there is a realistic argument to be made that the FBI and the CIA should be merged into one company and get rid of this rivalry that makes no sense in a modern day and time. There is perhaps some arguments that things like the military and the Air Force and all of them should be merged under one chain of command instead of several different subgroups of military. There's an argument that the Veterans Affairs medical benefits should just also be Medicaid or Medicare, Medicare for all, at least starting with the veterans would make some sense. There's definitely an argument that the post office should be able to legally allow other offerings. If the post office gave you email addresses where you could have your mail emailed to, most people would be very happy about that. If the post office was a streaming service where you could get ebooks from your local library, and that was all synergized under one company, most people would be fairly happy with that too. But yeah, that's not the case. Of course, I'm getting into the infrastructure of the US, so let's move on. I'm already going way too long. So clearly I am not the target audience for the Nintendo smartphone apps, and that they have topped 900 million downloads. Is that combined, or is that just the... Yeah, I think that includes everything like Fire Emblem Heroes, Mario Kart Tour, Super Mario Run. I don't think this is individually the music app, which that would be a really big number. That being said, I would be surprised if there's a major push when the Switch 2 comes out to see a lot more Nintendo apps, because the most recent apps by Nintendo still are the Alarmio setup app. I believe there's an app for that, and the music app. They haven't really tried to make a video game come out on smartphones. And they're not even mentioning like the Nintendo account app that controls Nintendo accounts by parents. Let's see. Mojang and Coffee Stain veterans form a new publishing label called Three Friends. They don't believe in rushing games to market or throwing money at problems, which those are fairly two separate concepts there. In that, yes, rushing games to market would be avoiding spending money, but throwing money at problems is the almost opposite of not rushing a game to market. So yeah, these are kind of moral stances that aren't going to actively apply to the reality of the situation in many cases. It's worth pointing out that there are 4 names being listed here. So Three Friends co-founders include this person, this person, this person, and this person, which is 4 people. So one of them's not a friend. And none of those are, as far as I can tell, Notch. Although it could be Notch, and I wouldn't know his real Swedish name. Might recognize it. So yeah, people form new companies. They're super positive and happy about it. on day one, and then they tend to go quiet until they have an actual game to announce or launch. Inherently, you kind of have to go a little public in forming your new company because you're trying to hire new people and you're trying to get game pitches and developments if you don't have those ideas. It would be nice if you could just announce a new company and you have a game ready to sell right then and there, but that's not realistically how most business is going to be done. Let's see. Paradox year-end report touts a strong 2024 output despite revenue decline. Square Enix's premium and MMO games are growing, but overall revenue is falling. Square Enix constantly unhappy, perhaps for good reasons, but also almost certainly because of poor leadership. Valve reminds devs they can't use in-game paid advertising on Steam. Massachusetts game development is among those who are suing the Trump administration over anti-trans passport policy. The lawsuit argues that part of the policies denying Americans gender-affirming identity markers on their passport can harm the safety of game developers. Interesting. Although, I imagine there's just going to be a lot of companies that are going to be friends listed on lawsuits like that, so this isn't particularly specifically around video games. And we'll see how far any of that really goes or not. That's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam, and inherently, had I gone through all of this first, I would just be playing a video at this point, pre-recorded, which maybe that would have worked, maybe it wouldn't have. Today, I don't think I really needed it. I think I was pretty awake and ready to go today anyways, so yeah. I think that worked fairly well. Alright, Asset Flip Attorney, I'm going to assume is garbage. I'm going to assume this is garbage. Not interested. Nope. What just happened there? How did I end up way... Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I just ended up on a Gaming on Linux article. Here. Otherwise, we're looking at Astronomics. I was trying to put this on the follow list. Yeah. Guess we're okay there. Let's see if I can gain momentum. And do I have anything else to talk about? Yeah, that's inherently the issue here, is that now, after streaming for 3 hours, I have very little to talk about. You certainly could mention my seat cushions have gone flat, and I am in fairly high amount of pain. I could stand up and fluff the cushions, but it'll only help so much. Usually takes them a few minutes to refluff. Yeah. Yeah, I've kind of run out of things to talk about. I'm working on trying to lower the heating bill in my house, and I'm increasingly running into it being hotter now that we're not really out of winter, but we're getting closer in that direction. Yeah. One of the problems I keep running into as far as cleaning and decluttering my house is I'll wash things and then leave them to air dry, and then that will just take up all my counter space for a couple days, or at least a day to air dry. Just have way too much stuff, and the whole plan is to eventually have an estate sale to get rid of all that stuff. The crazy thought, though, the worst case scenario is that the estate sale never happens. I just have a whole bunch of stuff, or I just toss a whole bunch of stuff to no avail. The plan is to get the house ready to rent, and the plan was to have it ready to rent by now, and it's not likely going to happen in at least another month. But worst case scenario, it may never happen. I might just give up on everything and just enjoy taking it easy for as long as I can financially enjoy taking it easy, and then once I run out of cash, just, I don't know, like, that is the worst case way to deal with it. Here's like a mobile ad type game. You don't see a lot of these that just look like blatant mobile ads. And yet, definitely you're seeing more and more Hearthstone clone-like games. Stealing at least the concept, if not the actual art. But yeah, it's true for anybody's scenarios that you can make the best laid plans of mice and men, and then you could slowly go through all those plans and realize, oh, nope, the world is against you, fate is against you, and none of those are going to work. And you can just run out of options. And typically that's when people end up homeless on the street. I can't help but worry that a lot of people are going to be homeless on the street, and more often in the next few years than previously. But yeah, society is definitely not a perfect system. No society is. It does not capture and protect everyone. Well, it captures everyone. It doesn't protect everyone from that. And you may hear talk of assistance services, but once you start to actually look into those assistance services, they often are nowhere near helpful enough. At best, they are going to help you to stay just as impoverished as you were in the past, but they're never going to give you an opportunity to rise above that level. Meanwhile, the default way a capitalist society is supposed to be is you're supposed to maybe go to school, maybe not. Regardless, you graduate, you get a job, and that job is supposed to make you somehow enough money to somehow become middle class or upper class, and that never really happens. At best, most people have a job that exploits them just enough where they can maintain their situation, and that's about it. And you're going to end up heavily indebted, and this looks like the game might have been an adult game outside of the adult section. Yeah, at best you're going to get majorly indebted for mortgages. As soon as you have one medical problem or any other kind of emergency, you're going to be majorly indebted that way because of those things too. But yeah, you never get anywhere better. Yeah. And some people will argue that's because as soon as a lot of people make extra money, they don't save it, they just start spending it, which is a very easy thing to fall into, but it's also just ignoring the fact that things are getting more expensive. Christmas is a major factor in that. Whereas if a significant number of people just said, hey, we're not getting Christmas gifts, we're not doing the whole Christmas thing, we can't afford it, that would help a lot of people. Of course, tell that to kids that Christmas is canceled, and that they are never getting any gifts at all throughout the year, or extremely rare situations, maybe on their birthday, and that's it. It's just not how modern kids expect to be pampered. But yeah, definitely have a lot of worry for society as a whole, and in part for myself too. Of course, this YouTube channel's like not going anywhere as far as being successful, even though I did have this one doesn't support English, does it? Yeah, even though the Super Mario movie review has gotten 170 views, I don't believe it's gotten a single subscriber, which is a thing to point out. And even if it did get a single subscriber, it's not likely going to get me 2,000 extra watch hours, which is what I really would need. So it would be very much the case that the Mario review or some other video on my channel would have to create a snowball situation. Here's one that definitely has some kind of uncensored patch, tagged sexual content in outside of the adult section. I lost my train of thought there, I think. Yeah, it seems like we're getting more asset flippy stuff, less perhaps AI generated stuff. There's another Toho game, not English. Yeah, I guess I was saying, even if my channel did create a snowball effect and got, say, 2,000 subscribers and 8,000 watch time, I just don't think that all content creators are such liars that somehow is going to turn into hundreds and hundreds of dollars in ad revenue each month. Like, I think what you very well would realize is that it's barely going to be $100 over the course of several months, 6 months, 5 months maybe, which could help a little, but not seriously, not really. In realisticness, I would need some kind of Patreon support that would be well into $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 a month to pay all my bills, and that's just way too much to expect anybody to actually donate. Not unless somebody wants to launder money or something. That would be about it would probably have to be some kind of shady reason. Anyways, we didn't have that many games come out on Steam. I wonder if that is the reality of the situation, or if I just had a macro that broke and stopped opening up links. I don't know. I'll take it as it worked as intended. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.